Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Leanne Beckwith, Swiftland's Continuing Education Coordinator, and I would like to welcome you all to today's webinar, Be a Manager and a Leader, Encouraging Stories in Your Library, with today's presenter, Linda Bruno. Linda Bruno has been developing and conducting training for libraries and other organizations for more than 15 years. She offers training on topics ranging from leadership skills to returning balance and lots of areas in between. Linda received her MBA from the University of Florida and has years of experience in hands-on management positions. She develops her workshops based on solid research and, more importantly, real-life application. Linda is also certified with DDI and Achieve Global. Please help me welcome Linda and enjoy her webinar. Linda?
Thanks so much, Leanne, and welcome everybody to today's session. I love stories. And if you look at the slide, I think most of us can agree that as soon as we hear the words once upon a time, we expect a story, don't we? We expect to be drawn into that. We expect to be engaged. We expect to be interested, all those kinds of things. In the library world, we have become very accustomed to statistics. And statistics are huge and they're critical, they're crucial. We don't get money if we don't have statistics, but they don't tell the whole story, do they? So we need to make sure we're engaging people's logical side, which is the statistics side of their brain, but we also need to make sure we're engaging their emotional side, not to be manipulative, not to get them to do what we want, but to help them understand what we do. That's part of it, isn't it? So I want you to close your eyes for a moment, and I want you to picture that you need to hire somebody like me. You need to hire somebody to come in and do training, to work with your folks, and all those kinds of things. So picture that. You are interviewing me, basically. So as I come to you, one thing I could say is that over 98% of my evaluations give me a score of excellent. And that's pretty good because you always have somebody in the group that maybe was told they had to be there and they don't give you as high as a score. Or I occasionally get the person that writes on an evaluation. I never give anybody the highest score because I just don't. So a 98% would be pretty good. And you might think, huh, that's pretty good. And the next person might come in and say they have 98.2% or whatever. And if you only look at the statistics, they're not going to tell you the Linda Bruno story. So keep your eyes closed and let me tell you a real life story that might influence you to make me the person that comes in and helps your people. I'm not asking you to hire me today. I'm just giving you this as an example of how stories work. Back in 2015, November of 2015, so almost 4 years ago now, I got this email and it says, Linda, I don't know if you will remember me, but I wanted to touch base with you. You presented at a conference in Madison, Wisconsin back in 2008. You were one of the main speakers at that conference. Your session on returning balance to your life still impacts me to this day. Okay, little side note here. The email was sent in 2015, almost in 2016. I did the conference in 2008. So she's writing me almost 8 years later. She wrote a whole paragraph about what she learned from that, how she's taken it to her next job. And she ended by saying, I wanted you to know the impact you made on my life and how grateful I am that I was able to see your presentation. Thank you! Exclamation point. When I sent her a note to tell her how much I appreciated her note, she emailed back and she said, you hear people say that someone changed their life, and I guess I get the privilege of telling you that you were one of the people who truly changed my life, and not just for a day or a week or even a year. This has shifted my perspective for many years now. Okay, you can open your eyes. Which one of those scenarios is going to make you want to hire me to help your people? Just type it into the chat box. Is it the statistic or the story? Or maybe you don't want to hire me at all. And again, I'm not asking anybody in the room to hire me. I'm just saying that this is the difference, isn't it, between a statistic and a story. I want to back up what I tell you with that statistic, but to really get your attention. Thank you, Sharon. Yes, I think it would probably be, and Kathleen, yep, Lisa. I think the story, you get a feeling from it, don't you? I don't know if you could hear it, but I almost broke down reading that. I keep this in a, what do you call those little polyvinyl sleeves, I guess, sheet protector. I keep that in a sheet protector in a notebook where I have notes and emails and copies of chats and all those kinds of things pertaining to what I do for a living. Because when I have a bad day, I can go back to my notebook. When I think, gosh, I wonder if anybody got that, I can go back to my notebook. And this one in particular just always moves me. So I want people to get a feeling from that story, don't I? I want people to really get the heart of Linda Bruno from that story. So, with that being said, you might want to print your handouts for today. They came with the invitation to the link that you could sign on into the webinar. So if you go back to that email, if you don't happen to have them printed in front of you, you can print them from that link because Leanne attached them for you. So you might want to do that because this is one of those, what I call an evergreen topic. It's something that you can use for as long as you work in the library, the information we're going to talk about today. So thinking about stories, I want to ask you, I've kind of touched on what the importance is for me in my profession, but would you all, and there are, I'm going to say probably 10 or 11 of us outside Deb and Leanne and myself, I'd like for each one of you to type into the chat box why it's important for you to encourage and collect stories in your library. Why did you come today? Why do you think it's important for you to collect stories in your library? Would you go ahead and type that into the chat box? And there are no right or wrong answers. It's about you and your library, isn't it? I see several of you typing. Sharon said we can use them for training new staff. Absolutely, Sharon. You know what? I'm going to expand on that. Something I don't know that I'd thought of before, but maybe even in the hiring process, right, Sharon? If you're interviewing somebody and you're trying to give them a sense of who you are as an organization, and you know, you're going to tell them the pay and you're going to tell them the hours they will work, and you maybe think how many things you have in circulation and what the details of the job would be. But what if after you did all of that or in the middle of that, you said, to give you an example, here's something that happened just the other day, and you told a story that might engage that prime person, that prime prospect for that job to the point where they would want to come and work for you. Kelly said it justifies services beyond numbers, the community impact. Very important word, right, Kelly? Because nowadays, if you don't have an impact, you don't get any money. And there are still people out there that are very set on the statistics. And as I said, I never want to say, don't use statistics. We don't need statistics. I never want to say that. What I'm trying to say here is that shouldn't be our sole focus. Because when we can engage people's emotions and let them see that impact, it makes a difference, doesn't it? Circulation doesn't tell the impact, does it? Circulation just says this is how many books that were checked out, and maybe one person checked out 10% of those. It really doesn't show the impact. Alyssa said to show that patrons are more than just statistics, exactly, and how much the library impacts them. There's that word again. They are more than just statistics, so much more. Zenobia said because it makes the library come alive. I love that. You come alive. Statistics aren't alive. They're just there. And they tell me some things, but they don't really come alive. And as Lisa said, make it more interesting and value our impact. Judy said numbers are static. That's a great way to put it. And unemotional. Stories make people listen and have an impact when you're trying to put forth a new program or try to do something like discontinuing fines, because you can tell how that has an impact, can't you? Kathleen said it makes staff and patrons feel valued. Absolutely. I like having a good high number for my evaluations, but it doesn't tell me really how people feel. Some people just don't want to hurt your feelings. There are other people who don't care if they hurt your feelings. I can remember one time I tell this story because it's kind of amusing. I did a program on emotional intelligence, which makes this really ironic because there were a whole group of people that were told that morning they had to attend my program. Now, that is not something that a trainer wants to hear because they're already mad at Linda Bruno before they ever walk in. So when I asked them to fill out an evaluation for me, they would fill out one for their employer as well, but I wanted the evaluation for me so that I could tweak my program and make sure I was giving what I needed to give. I said to them, what was your score? And somebody gave me a 2 out of 10, which sort of makes me gasp. I'm, have heart palpitations. And then I always ask if it wasn't a 10, what would have made it a 10? And I turned over that particular card and it said, your hair is too short. So there are people out there that are kind of mean and not very nice, but it's just part of the deal. Yes, Kelly, dollars. We like that. Absolutely. To build a community. I like the first one, Idalina, to build a community unit. I like that too. And I know you meant unity. Yeah, Kelly, that I just wanted to sit down and have a cup of coffee with those people, with that person that put that my hair was too short. But Idalina put to build a community unit. And isn't that, even though I think she meant the word unity, you want to build a community unit, don't you? Because what if you need help with something? What if you need somebody to advocate for you? So here are some of the ideas when I was putting this together a couple of months ago to get ready for today, because this is a brand new topic that we're talking about for Swiftland, developed just for them. And some of the things that I talked about is, number one, it kind of takes the pulse of your community too, doesn't it? When you really start getting intentional about paying attention to stories in your library, you may see the areas that are most important to your community because those are the stories that surface. Those are the ones that bubble to the top. And so it might give you a whole different window into what you're providing for your community. So number one on your handouts is it takes the pulse of your community. It helps you understand the needs because you can see what's really resonating with them, what's really making a difference with them. As several of you alluded to, it helps other people see what you see because you probably wouldn't be in this room today if you didn't already think your library had an impact on your community. Most of the people I talk to that work in the library field, which is all I deal with, most of the people say they're certainly not in it for the money. I totally get that, me either, but that they make a difference. And there are people out there, you could probably name some, that look at you and say, well, all you do is check out books. And that's not seeing what you see, is it? That's not seeing the heart of your library. So that's another good reason to think about collecting stories. And by the way, when I talk about collecting stories, here's one of the things I like to suggest to people because I've talked about stories to other groups. I haven't done this particular program, but when I ask people to collect stories, if I'm face to face with them, I hand out neon colored index cards for them to start thinking about the stories in their libraries. And I always suggest go buy a pack of these at Staples or Office Depot or wherever it might be and put them in the break room or put them behind the circ desk or put them someplace where every employee will see them. Put them someplace where everybody will see them. Explain to people what you're doing. Have people write the stories that they come across on those neon colored index cards so that you actually end up with a history of what you mean to your community. And then we'll talk about later how you can use those, as some of you have already touched on. So that's what I mean by collecting them. We think we can collect them just in our minds, but I don't know about you. There's a whole bunch of stuff coming in and out of my mind on a daily basis these days. And so if you just put me on the spot and said, tell me your favorite story, I would tell you the story of Emily that I just read you. But I've got dozens of others that are just as meaningful to me. I have them written down in my notebook, but I don't have them top of mind like I do Emily's. So that's another reason to write them down. And they don't have to write a book or a chapter or even a page. just enough details to really show you what happened in that situation. And in these handouts, we'll talk about what those details need to be so that you never lose that particular story because they are forever, aren't they? If something happened last year that was phenomenal in your library, that doesn't go away just because you start a new fiscal year. It should be something that you keep on hand to know your impact over time as well. Number three says it shows how your library has changed. I bet if I asked all of you to raise your hands or if raise your hands if your library has changed in the last 5 years, I suspect everybody in the room would raise their hands. Yes, exactly, Kelly. Yeah, some of you are already doing that. And if we don't change, we don't stay, do we? We don't exist anymore because our community is going to demand that change just based on how our society is moving forward. So those stories show that maybe a story you had and you can pull from your history and from your memory and you can go back 4 years and you can say I can remember when we weren't doing XYZ, but John, who's a father of 3, came in and he had lost his job and blah blah blah. And I don't mean blah 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 in a negative way. I just don't want to try to create a story that I'm not familiar with, but that's what was important at that time. But now John comes in for story time with his children, and one of his children is on the autism spectrum and spoke for the first time at library story time or something like that. And you actually show that growth of your library, that continual fluidity, if you will. You're very flexible, you're very in tune with your community. So it will show how your library has changed. It gets more people in the door. If you start telling stories, people love to tell stories out in your community. They're going to share those stories, aren't they? If you make a point of saying, so Leanne, tell me how that job search came out, then Leanne's going to remember that the reason she got the job was that you helped with her resume and her interviewing skills. And now she's really excited. As a matter of fact, I got an email just yesterday from somebody that was applying for a new job and we had talked about a few things and I didn't influence that person at all, but I got the email saying I got the job. And that's part of my story is I get excited because I'm engaged with those people. It will get more people in your door and that's always a positive thing. It describes an exciting event or program. You tend to not realize how exciting some of the things you do are, how unusual some of the things you do are. I was reading an American Libraries Journal a couple of days ago. They tend to pile up on me because I get so many journals. And it was about a library that does beekeeping and talks to people about the number of not species of bees, kinds of bees that there are that can be helpful to the community and all that kind of stuff. And who would ever think? I bet you half of your community wouldn't think about you doing something like that. So it describes something that's exciting that people would not normally connect with your library. It builds bonds, the unity that Idalina was talking about. People can experience something monumental to them at your library and not have a special attachment to it, right? It would build that bond among your staff and the community members. I bet some of you have experienced people coming to your library and they only want to talk to one person because that's the person that helped them find a job, or that's the person that helped them find a resource on a health issue, or that's the person that did story time and got your 4-year-old interested in reading or whatever it is. It builds those bonds between your staff and your library as a whole and the people that are out in your community. So that's something we want to do. When you have bonds, people trust you, people want to help you, people support you. Number 7, it engages more partners. What do you think I mean by that? Would you type it into the chat box? What do you think I mean by engages more partners when you have stories to tell? Chrissy said it gives a voice to members and not just staff. Absolutely. To the community. People can relate, Alyssa said. Yeah. Kelly also said they want to be part of that narrative. They want to help fellow community members as well. Sharon said it broadens their view of what we can offer them. And think about the partners in your community. Think about the social service agencies that you probably partner with without even realizing it. Can you think of any? Go ahead and type them into the chat box. I see a couple of you are typing. Parks Department, schools, community centers, boys and girls clubs, food pantries, free preschool, parks and rec, transit. Look at the number in the chat box with just 3 people responding. The number of partners that are out there and available to you. Now, let's say that people in the Parks Department happen to be doing a presentation at a community center, and they use a story that was actually developed through library participation to talk to the people at the community center who maybe you don't currently interact with, and all of a sudden you engage more partners, don't you? Because the people at the community center may have thought, I never really thought about the library doing that. But the Parks Department got excited about your stories. After school programs, absolutely. So just think about that. We know if we spent a few minutes on this, if we were face to face and just did sort of a little work group on this, we could probably come up with several dozen partners that different libraries engage with. But think about the fact that you can expand that and get more partners because they're the ones sitting there going, I had no idea. Runners clubs, tax preparers, veterans service, health departments. Now, let's just take all of those answers and kind of interweave them and think about one of them not being aware of what the library does and how that might affect what they think they can get from your library. Let's take tax preparers and veteran services and say, okay, one of those does not actually do anything with our library currently. But if there's a group of tax preparers or financial advisors or whatever it might be in your community, and they work with the veterans, and the veterans didn't know anything about what could be offered at your library, all of a sudden you've opened a whole new world, haven't you? If somebody says, they have a program at the library specifically tailored to veterans working on their resumes and their interviewing skills. We did that here in Ocala. It wasn't through the library at that time because we had so much high unemployment. The workforce board actually put together a team to help veterans, and it was specifically for veterans in that particular case, a 3-day program where we talked about the psychology of getting out of the military. We talked about their resumes. We talked about interviewing skills, which they sorely lacked because a lot of them had been in the military for a long time. Had one young lady in a program and she said, I really don't know what to put on my resume. I was just doing my job, which is what the veterans usually think of it. They just think they're doing their job. And I said, what are you most proud of that you did while you were in the military? She said, on my second day as an air traffic controller, I averted a midair collision between 2 of our own aircraft. And I said, oh my gosh, how much were the aircraft worth? And she said, a few million a piece. And I said, we need to research that because you just saved our government that much money. And she said, yeah, and I even got invited to lunch with the president. Not the president of her unit. There is no such thing. It was the president of the United States. She got invited to lunch. I would never have known that had I not asked that question because people are not, yeah, wow. People are not used to telling their stories, are they? Some of you aren't used to telling your stories. And that's why I'm trying to drag them out of you. And that's what I would have to do in that class. I would be so tired when I would go home at night from those classes because it was like using a shovel to dig out the phenomenal work that these people had done without us even realizing it. Another lady who was a fairly petite lady, when I asked that question, she said, I did a one-man carry. I said, what are you talking about? And she said someone had gotten injured in a battle, and the surgeon was not permitted to leave the tent to help me rescue that person. So I had to go out and carry them in by myself. I'm thinking to myself, how do you even do that? But the story was so compelling. Kelly said it's hard to advocate sometimes. We have yes, we can't be afraid to blow our own horn. That's exactly right. But you're not blowing your own horn, are you? Really? You're just telling stories. I had somebody in a program like that once say to me, I'm not going to brag. I took a deep breath and I said, how is anybody ever going to know what you can do for them if you don't tell them what you're capable of doing? It's not bragging if it's the truth. How is anybody in your community going to know what you're capable of doing for your community if you don't tell them? See, you're putting a burden on them if you don't tell them. You're expecting them to fight for you, to defend you, to advocate for you, to do all those things, and yet you've not given them any ammunition. All they know is there's a building that has books and computers and story time and things like that, but you need to give them the ammunition, don't you? Zenobia said Health Bus gives free shots, hepatitis A, etc., and we get free tax preparation for the public. Exactly. A lot of people don't even know that, do they? It's how libraries have changed and morphed really kind of into, I've heard them called community centers now. I've even heard them gone so far as to say social service agencies in some respects. So engage those partners. The more you engage the partners, the more you engage the individuals in your community. Connects the library to the soul of your community. I just like that term. And that's what it is, isn't it? Because the more stories you tell, as I said earlier, the more you start to sense what's really important to your community, what's really impacting them, what's really making that difference. And that's the soul of your community, isn't it? That's what you're trying to accomplish, is be in tune with that so that you can help the soul of your community be healthy, whether that's physically healthy, mentally healthy, spiritually healthy, whatever, financially healthy, anything. That's the soul of your community. So nobody said we also lend musical instruments, hotspot free Wi-Fi, yep, fishing poles, tools, absolutely. I talked to a library at a conference one time that loaned out cake pans, just any number of things, because whatever's important in your community. Libraries are doing a lot with gardens now, and then bringing in nutritionists and things like that to teach people how to be healthy. Think about this. If any of you, I don't have any idea what your ages are, but I will tell you that I've been around long enough that if you had told me this that many years ago, and I'm thinking even 10 or 12 years ago, that you would be doing some of these things, I would have laughed. Not to be mean, but I would have thought there's no way a library is going to do that. They do books and computers, right? There are still people out there that have those feelings, so we need to make sure they are aware of what we do. Here's one that we don't often think about. It keeps your library focused on its mission, doesn't it? If you're telling stories and the stories are all about something totally different than your mission, then it might be time to take a step back and revise your mission. If you're making decisions based on your mission, but that's not where your stories are coming from, there might be a mismatch there. So you want to make sure that what you're doing in your library matches your mission and your vision and the values of your library, and those stories will almost subtly tell you if you are aligning with your library's mission, because you will see by the kinds of stories you're getting what kind of impact you're making on your community. Number 10 is one that probably scares a lot of you, and that is it could develop your public speaking skills. How many of you, would you just type yes or no in the chat box, are ever asked to speak to maybe a community group, a civic organization, any other groups? I see several yeses. Are you all starting to see how this could really help what you speak to the public about? You could start off by saying, yes, exactly, Judy, with fundraising. You could say a statistic. because you want to get their attention when you're doing public speaking. So you could say, did you know our library has 57,212 books? We have 19 computers, and you could give a few other statistics. Then you could say, and that's all really important, but you know what really matters in our library? And then you tell your story. And then you've got them in the palm of your hand, as they say, right? And you know what? When you have a story to tell and you know that story inside out because it nurtures your own heart, public speaking is not public speaking any longer. You're just there telling a story. And it can relieve you of the pressure that the words public speaking tend to put on us, because you're going to give them some stuff that they need about the library, but then you're going to talk to them about why your library is so important by using a story or two. I can remember one story that I've had dozens of stories told to me over the years, especially since I started talking about stories about 3 or 4 years ago. But I can remember one in particular where they were talking about a little boy who was visually challenged, and he would come into the library with his mom, and he knew that there were bookmarks sitting at the circ desk. So every time he would come in, he would run up and grab a bookmark. And of course, he couldn't read the bookmark, but it was something for free. And doesn't every little kid like something for free? So we'd run up and get the bookmark. So the staff got together and they said, how could we make this a special experience? I'll use the name for Sam, the little boy. And they said, what if we got a Braille imprinter and we imprinted a bookmark, just like the other bookmarks, but we imprinted it with his name and some little welcome to the library, or we're so glad to see you, or whatever it is. So they did that. They got together, they ordered some kind of a Braille marker. They made his bookmark and they kept it behind the counter. They pretty much knew what day he would come in. And when they saw him coming up to the door, they put it in the bookmark tray. And he came running in like he always did, and he grabbed a hold of the bookmark and he stopped because he could feel the Braille. And he got so excited with his mom. And of course, she didn't really make the connection right away until she looked at it closer and saw the Braille. Do you think that made an impact on mom? Do you think mom shared that with anybody in the community? Do you think it made Mark or Sam or whatever his name was a lifelong library person? Probably. You think that could be a story that library could use to talk to civic organizations and so forth? I think so. So think about that. It maybe develops is the wrong word. It can enhance your public speaking skills. It can make people want you to come and talk. Now, here's the thing. You don't want to use the same story over and over again, do you? That's why you need to collect them. What if somebody asks you once a month to come and speak? It's Kiwanis, it's Rotary, it's Mothers of Preschoolers, it's whoever it is for fundraising, it's civic organizations. But you've only really thought about one story. That's going to get old for you for sure, and it's not going to be fresh anymore, but possibly old for them too, because maybe they've been in another group that you've spoken to. But if you have a file folder or a little recipe box with those 3x5 index cards in it, and over the course of time, you have 4, you have 8, you have 21, you have 37, however many stories pile up, and they will pile up. You can always go through and weed them out if you want to. I don't think I would, because it's the history of your library. It actually is a history of your library. So think about that. Then the next time somebody asks you, Alyssa, would you come and speak to our association about the library? You're thinking, oh, I know just the story to take with them. How cool would that be? Yes, please. Exactly. So, and here's the other thing about public speaking. Don't wait for somebody to ask. Once you've started accumulating the stories and you know that you can make an impact with those people, you can really engage their minds and their hearts with the library and its mission. Go ahead and contact Kiwanis and say, I know you need speakers from time to time. Would you like us to come and speak about what the library has to offer? I'm telling you, Kiwanis, I think, has 52 meetings a year or 50 or whatever. Rotary has, I think, maybe weekly meetings sometimes or monthly. There are organizations that are always looking for engaging speakers, not somebody that's going to get up there and say, only we have 57,212 books, because if that's all you're going to say, it's not engaging. But if you can wrap that around everything else that happens at the library and tell those stories, you will be in demand as a public speaker. So, was there anything else that you came up with? Other reasons that we haven't talked about that might be helpful about why it would be important to encourage and collect those stories? Okay, I don't see anything popping up. So let's move on toward the bottom of page 1. We know it's important. That's why we're here today. We have a lot of good reasons to really make a concentrated effort when we leave here today. But why don't we do it automatically? Would you type that into the chat box? What do you think? Why isn't this an automatic with all the wonderful things we do, especially in more recent years? We've always been wonderful, right? But in more recent years, we've really broadened our own horizons. Why don't we automatically collect those stories? Oh, Alyssa, that's a good point. We're so used to just tracking when things go wrong. You said sometimes, but I think we're so used to tracking what goes wrong in life in general, aren't we? As human beings, we kind of tend to go to that, fix that, make sure everybody's happy. We don't think about looking at the positives. Time, Susan said. Absolutely. We think it would take a lot of time, but it doesn't, does it, Susan? If you do the little system that I mentioned, the 3x5 index cards where they're always laying out at the circ desk, it takes what, 32 seconds to write down enough details that somebody could ask you what the story actually involves when you're getting ready to go out and talk to somebody about it. So really, it doesn't take a lot of time. It might take a little bit of time to introduce the concept at the library. The next time you have a meeting, somebody's got to, order the index cards or whatever. But if you're placing office supply orders, that's a 2-second job. We use that as an excuse, but it really isn't time consuming. Judy said it is time consuming, but it's not if we get into the habit, Judy, of doing it and we grab a card, we write down the details. Lisa said we forget to be in the moment. And that's part of that time thing, isn't it? Because if we forget to be in the moment and we remember and it's just before we leave, we're not going to write it down. Or if we remember in the midst of taking care of somebody else, we're not going to write it down. Overwhelmed, absolutely. But do you think this might be important enough to just make it a habit, to just make it part of the routine? I don't consider it a burden so much or an extra duty as I do a way to really encourage those bonds that we talked about. And Zenobia said that's a very good reason. It hasn't been encouraged in the past. And so we've never thought about it. It's just part of our jobs, right? The things that happen, the stories we hear, that's all just part of our job. Yes, exactly, Susan. You've got to make it part of the routine. And Zenobia said administration is too focused on what the complaints are, and they should be, right? But not to the exclusion of the good stuff. Because what happens is when we're only focusing on the complaints, we think that's all we get. It's another reason for us to be aware of collecting stories because we really can get very focused on the negative when we're not focusing on the good stuff. Add it to your monthly report. There you go. Just real quick. Add it to the monthly report. Maybe some people don't see the benefit of collecting stories. And if you don't after today's session, that's totally okay. There are no encouraging stories police out there running around. But I hope we've delved deep enough today for you to see that there is a compelling reason, at least one, and we talked about several. It should be compulsory. I think so too, Zenobia, in case you couldn't tell. That's how much I believe in this because I have heard so many phenomenal stories from the library. I had a neighbor about a year and a half ago. We were having, I don't know, New Year's Eve gathering or something. And we were sitting at the dinner table, a glass of wine and some appetizers. And he kind of pushed back his chair a little bit. And, they all know I work with a lot of library organizations. They know what I do for a living. And he said, do you think libraries are even going to be around in a few years? And I almost choked on my wine. And I said, oh my gosh, don't let my people hear you say that. And he goes, yeah, but I mean, people don't really even read that much anymore. I had to educate him, folks. and tell him a couple of the stories that I've heard. I said, I have dozens of those stories, how libraries are engaged in their community. And if I have them, I haven't written them down because I don't work for those libraries. But if I have those stories, think about the ones you have and think about how that might engage somebody that doesn't believe in your mission, right? So how can we use them? Type in a way you could use stories. We mentioned a couple very early. Eileen said we used to have a public evaluation, but not anymore. Yeah, and you really just kind of want to hear about your stories from people talking to you, don't you? Celebrating the anniversary or history of the community. Absolutely, Christy. Or the library itself, right? How cool would it be if every year on the anniversary of your library, this one just popped into my head, folks. Every year on the anniversary of your library, you did a display on stories you've collected this year. And it doesn't have to be, you know, identity focused where people would know who you were talking about or anything, just the story of what happened. What are some other reasons how we could use those stories? Begin an introduction on a positive note. Absolutely. Let me tell you something fun that happened at our library. Let me tell you something that will just really make you think, make you appreciate what you have, whatever it might be. All of the above, right? When I was making my notes, one of the things I put down was to start and end your meetings. Would everybody please write that on your handouts? Why do you think that might be important? To start your meeting on a positive note with a story. Yeah, absolutely. It's part of your power when you're asking friends for money, Susan. Absolutely. They need to know why it's important for you to get that money, don't they? And you know what? Sometimes it clarifies for you. What if you're going to the friends to ask for something that you thought was a good idea, but you realize now you don't have any stories that are connected to that? You don't have anybody really asking for that. You just heard about it and thought it would be a good idea. It might clarify things for you as well. For a slideshow, absolutely. Great reminders, inspiration for our mission. When you start a meeting with a story, first of all, everybody starts looking for those stories. Secondly, it's a great time for us to record them. And when you end the meeting on a story, it ends it on a positive note. It reminds everybody how important their jobs are. That right now, for me, would be one of the biggest reasons I would want to collect stories. Susan, I'm not sure what you say. There isn't kind of PLA outcomes. I'm not sure what you're saying there. So help me fill in blanks inside my little brain here. I'm not sure what that means. But you can use stories to, if you're going through a tough time where somebody's telling you you're going to cut your budget and all those kinds of things, you could just take a moment during a meeting to reflect on the positive stories that you've encompassed, that your library encompasses. I'm going to use that word again. Grant writing. Maybe you don't do the grant writing, but whoever does the grant writing might be able to use some really good stories. Board meetings. Share with your partners, your collaborators. Project outcome for public libraries. Okay, absolutely, stories. You know, the American Library Association has been talking about stories for several years with their slogans of libraries change lives or transform lives or whatever that was. Several of the slogans that the Library Association has used have directly related to stories, haven't they? Zenobia says, stories justify the presence of the library in the community. All of the above. I know we can find reasons, and I'm going to use that word even though I think sometimes they're excuses because we are just not in the habit of doing it. But I think there are much more important reasons for us to make an effort to do it. So let's talk about some of the subcategories where we might dig deeper and find those stories. Because to just say, okay, go find a library story, you might think, I don't even have any idea where to start thinking about that. Well, technology would be an area of your library that might have a good story. It might be somebody, you know, the typical thing that we hear a lot of is grandma comes in, she's not sure how to use email or FaceTime or whatever to connect with her grandkids, and you're able to do that, and now she's connected to her grandkids. It could be that technology enabled you to help somebody develop a really cool resume and they came back in 3 days later to tell you they got the job and that the person hiring them told it was because of their resume. Do you have a technology story? Just real quick. Anything in technology that would be a good story to think about, get a few more details put together and put it in your collection? Maybe somebody that's housebound and now instead of having to get physical books has an e-reader and you were able to teach them when they did get into the library so that they could stay home most of the time. Maybe they just have 47 pieces of tech equipment that they don't know how to use, or apps that they want to use and they don't know what they're for or how to use them, games to keep them busy. So those are some areas in technology. How about programming? Give me a story on programming. Anybody. I know you have lots of programming stories. It could be on finance or health or nutrition or hobbies or any number of things. Give me a story, just very briefly. I know your programming generates a lot of story lines. What's one of your favorites? And I'm asking you on the spot. Just think how easy this would be if it became habit, if it was just part of your process. That every day when you came in, if something popped out to you as being really cool, something your library did for somebody, you just jot it down on an index card. People can always come and ask you the extra details if they're going to go out and talk to somebody about it. But if you've got enough details about maybe the age of the person, what the situation was, how you resolved it, and what the results were, all on an index card, brief, succinct, doesn't take much time, then people can dig into it a little bit more and get those stories. Here's a story I heard at the Leadership Institute this past year. One of the ladies gave an example of somebody in her library that was doing a prison program for women. And she went to the prison and they finally figured out that what they wanted to do, this one lady wanted to do an audio recording of a chapter of a book to send to her child. And so they did. And a couple weeks later, the prison called and said, "We need you to come to the prison." And she's thinking, what did I do wrong? And I probably got the exact details, but you'll get this. I probably got the exact details a little bit out of whack here. She went back to the prison and the lady, the prisoner, had gotten a tape back from her child reading the next chapter. Then they figured out how to video it. Is that not life-changing, folks? And I just gave you the 6-second version. But think about that. Lisa said during summer reading, a boy who just started to read could not wait to start to look at his new book. Exactly. And you tell the whole story when you're telling it, don't you, Lisa? You talk about the little boy who hadn't read up to this point, and now he's an engaged reader for life, and he might become an astronaut or whatever. Who knows? So nobody said, I know one of the branches has tech buddies where a teen assists a senior or anyone who needs help with their computer and library apps. Yes, and then I want you to go a little bit beyond that. Find the story of a senior that really impacted. Because you have programming, you have services, you have all of these things. You know they impact people. Find your stories. You don't have to find 100 stories a month. Find one. Certainly probably have more than that. And I'm going to encourage you to write them down whenever you have them. But I'm not asking here that you're going to develop a, Funk and Wagnall's encyclopedia of stories for your library. I'm just saying be on the lookout. Don't just think of it, yeah, we have a summer reading program and 16 kids come. That's a statistic. It's not a story. The story is about the one child, like I mentioned, maybe it's a child who's never spoken before. Maybe it's a child who didn't talk to anybody else in the group, for 3 months and then just slowly started to make friends. And mom came up and told you later that she's never had any friends before. It's those kinds of things. It's not always something with fireworks, but you got to dig deeper than just here are the services we offer to come up with your stories. Don't make anything up. It's not what I'm asking you. So think about technology, programming, and services, tax services somebody mentioned earlier, those kinds of things. Think about events you have. And don't just describe the event. It's great if you tell me you have a family festival. That sounds like fun, except I'm not a family. Give me something that's going to move me. Do you see the difference between just describing the service or event or program and actually pulling out an individual story? Because most of it happens in the category that comes next. That's everyday activities. Most of the stories happen in your everyday activities, don't they? Whether it is programming or services or whatever, it's usually just something that happens in the course of your day, which is one of the reasons we don't always recognize them, because it's, quote, what we do. There may be stories within your partnerships. If you ever get a moment, look up Twinsburg Library in Ohio and their partnership with everybody from the health department to transportation. There are 7 or 8 partnerships they have created simply from trying to make sure one little boy got library services. It's a phenomenal story, and it's real. And I've emailed them back and forth a couple of times to get updates to see how they're doing with that story. So think about those partnerships and collaborations that you have. Social service agencies that you collaborate with, your workforce board that you might collaborate with, everyday activities like faxing. Somebody couldn't close on their house because they didn't know how to use a fax machine or whatever it was, and they were at risk of losing their deposit. Do you see how that story comes about? And again, we don't have to share names or dates or anything like that, just the story of why the library is important. So let's take a look at this. When we're talking about key components of a story, you want it to be a real person. You want it to say, we had a patron. No, that's not what you want to say. Because if you're talking to other people about your story, the word patron doesn't resonate with them. The word little boy does. The word a woman who had lost her job does. Again, you don't have to have names. You don't have to have ages. You just need to tell me about this real person. The next component might be the problem or the situation or the concern or the issue or the incident, any of the above. So you start out with a little boy came in and he was afraid of the reading dog. That's the problem. And he was really anxious about being around dogs. What did the library do? Now, you don't want to focus on, here's the library, we saved the day. You're just telling the story of the little boy. It's the little boy's story, isn't it? It's what the library did to help, but it's the little boy's story. So what did the library do in a supporting role to help that little boy? So we decided to bring in the reading dog twice a week and let the little boy come and sit wherever he wanted to sit. And after 4 visits, he kept inching closer and closer until last Tuesday, he actually reached out to pet the dog. So what was the library's intervention or supporting role? The library is what made that possible, isn't it? You're not going to go around thumping your chest, doing anything like that. You're just sharing with people that you made a difference in that little boy's life by paying attention to the fact that he was nervous and anxious about being close to a dog. And so you just made sure that at his own pace, he was able to move closer to the dog. Now, maybe this happened 6 months ago, and mom just came in last week to say he asked for his own puppy because he was comfortable at the library with the reading dog. I'm making all of that up, obviously, but you have things like that happen all the time, don't you? Because you want to give people what actually happened then. And again, doesn't have to be fireworks. It's not a big deal. I mean, how many people would get excited that, because of the library, a little boy got a puppy? That's not really going to excite me. But if you tell me the story about how he was afraid to be in the same room with a dog, and you just let him sit right outside the door, or whatever that story comes out to be. And that mom now told you that he wanted to get his own puppy because the library was a safe place, which libraries are, for him to be exposed to the dog rather than go into a shelter and be mauled, not physically mauled, but jumped on and licked and all that kind of stuff, which would scare him even more. So what then happened? The aha moment of that particular story. And then try to come up with something that you can say, like the American Library Association did, that's why libraries change lives. You come up with a little tagline, if you're especially if you're speaking to the Kiwanis or a social organization or whatever it might be. You want to wrap that story up with a tagline that shows the impact of your library. Again, it's not your library's story per se, it's the little boy, but you can say, and that's how we change lives. And if you tell two stories, and maybe one's about a younger person, one's about an older person, you could say at the end, and that's how we change lives from young to old, from A to Z, whatever you want to call it. So you want to have something that libraries change lives. Sometimes libraries save lives, don't they? Sometimes it's just that libraries make a difference. And I use the word just because that's not like saving lives, but that's why libraries make a difference. You want to have something that you feel comfortable saying about your library. What might that be? Let me just throw that out to you. I know we've got a couple minutes here and we're going to wrap it up in just a moment, but what might be your phrase that after you talk to somebody and told them your story, and let's say it's a Kiwanis Club and they ask you to come and speak, you've got your statistics ready, you've got a couple of really good stories, how would you end that talk with a phrase that pays? Obviously, you're not selling anything or anything like that, but it's going to impact them and it's going to make you memorable and your library memorable. Just think of a phrase that you might come up with about your own library. And if you can't think of one today, you can always use the American Library Association's phrases. And I think they've had two or three at least over the last few years. Poke around in on their website and you can probably find some things that you could use. Libraries are a gateway to anything you can imagine or dream about. Think about that. Now, if you just got up as Zenobia and you told me that at a talk after you'd given me statistics and given me all the dry stuff, I'll use the term dry stuff, I knew what you meant. It wouldn't really be meaningful, would it? Zenobia just spouted off all these statistics, which are true and are real and are important. And then she says, libraries are a gateway to anything you can imagine or dream about. That's a great mission statement or a vision statement, but it's not really going to move me. It's not really going to sink into me because I don't work there unless you attach it to a story. So if you tell me the story and then you say, libraries are a gateway to anything you can imagine or dream about because of the story you just told me, you got my attention now. But if you just use the tagline because it's part of your mission statement, yeah, I hear it. It's a mission statement. Oh, well, let's go have lunch. Right? You see how that all connects? You've got to be passionate about those stories. You've got to be passionate about why those stories are important. So think about what your story is. I'm not going to ask you to type into the chat box. I appreciate all your participation today because that's what helps other people see how they can use this information. But I am going to encourage you to think about this after we leave the webinar today, to grab, if it's just a white index card or whatever kind of a card you might have laying around, and start your story collection before you even get your neon cards. And the reason I say neon cards is they'll be so obvious. People will see them laying at the circ desk. And if you talked about it at a meeting or whatever, they'll know what those are for. White index cards are just going to blend in with all the paperwork you probably process during a day. They're not going to get attention. Do something that's attention getting. And a 3x5 card, if you don't think 3x5 is big enough, do the 4x6s. But start your story collection today. It's never going to be non-useful. You will always find a use for it. We talked about several uses already. and you'll always find a use for it. So I want to thank you for being here today. When you have a chance, go back through items A through E and fill in the blanks for your library. That's how you can get started. Who's the real person? What was the situation? How did the library help? What actually happened? And then the phrase that pays. Just jot those down and see how quick that goes. You could even do it. You could actually print your 3x5 cards or 4x6 cards with real person, situation, library's role, what happened, and the phrase that pays, and just have people fill in the blanks like a little template. So think about getting your index cards. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for sharing in the chat box and helping everybody else that was in the room today. I'll see you next time. Go and collect those stories. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Linda, for an informative webinar. Attendees, if you enjoyed this webinar, we ask that you join us on Wednesday, September 11th at 2 p.m. for Linda's next webinar, Be a Manager and a Leader, Manage Yourself and Your Time. As always, we encourage you to keep an eye on the Swiftland CE calendar, Swiftland Facebook page, or your messages from the listserv for more training. Thank you everyone for attending and have a terrific rest of your day.